My 25th birthday gift, a jade pendant, flung me back to the 11th century Northern Song Dynasty in China. Suddenly, I was Chen Ailin, navigating a world of hanfu and horse-drawn carts. A chance encounter with the dashing General Zhao Mingyuan, a man of quiet strength and hidden melancholy, leads to an impossible love story across time. Will I ever return home, or will my life forever intertwine with his? Jade pendant felt cool against my skin as I fingered it absently, admiring how the dim light of my bedroom caught its contours. It was my 25th birthday, and among all the gifts I'd received that day, this family heirloom from my grandmother was undoubtedly the most special. "Emily," my grandmother had said, her weathered hands pressing the jade into my palm, "this pendant has been in our family for generations. Legend says it holds magical powers." Her eyes, creased with age but bright with wisdom, had twinkled mysteriously. I'd smiled, attributing her words to traditional Chinese superstition that I, as an American-raised daughter of immigrants, found endearing, if not entirely believable. Born and raised in San Francisco, I'd always felt caught between two worlds. My parents had worked tirelessly to assimilate, to give me every American opportunity, while my grandmother remained a living bridge to our Chinese heritage. It was through her stories that I developed a fascination with ancient Chinese culture, eventually leading me to major in East Asian studies at university. Now, as I prepared for bed in my modest apartment overlooking the city lights, I clasped the pendant around my neck, admiring its elegant craftsmanship. The jade was a deep, lustrous green, carved into an intricate design that seemed to shift under my gaze. Despite my academic skepticism, I couldn't help but feel a strange energy emanating from it. "Magic," I whispered to myself with an amused smile, "if only." That night, my dreams were unusually vivid. Voices called to me in a language I recognized as ancient Chinese, not the Mandarin I'd studied, but something older, more formal. The words floated just beyond comprehension, like a familiar melody played in a different key. I felt myself drifting, falling through layers of consciousness, the pendant at my throat growing warmer against my skin. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. Gone was my IKEA furniture and the hum of city traffic. Instead, wooden beams crossed a low ceiling above me, and through paper windows filtered a golden light that carried the sounds of unfamiliar street noises. No cars, no sirens, but the clop of hooves, the calls of vendors, and conversations in a dialect I could barely follow. Panic seized me as I bolted upright on the straw mat that had replaced my memory foam mattress. My hands flew to my neck. The pendant was still there, warm to the touch, as if it had absorbed the heat of my journey. I was wearing strange clothes, too. A simple hanfu of rough cotton, nothing like my usual sleep shirt and shorts. "This can't be happening," I whispered, pinching myself hard enough to leave a mark. The pain was real. This was no dream. When I stumbled outside the small room, I found myself in a modest courtyard. An elderly woman looked up from where she was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, her eyes widening at my disheveled appearance. "You're awake, child," she said in accented Chinese. "We feared you might never wake." Summoning my limited classical Chinese knowledge, I managed to ask where I was and what had happened. The woman explained that her son had found me unconscious by the riverbank 3 days ago, with no identification or companions. They had taken me in, assuming I was a traveler who had been robbed and abandoned. Over the next few days, as I recovered from what they assumed was trauma-induced amnesia, I pieced together the impossible truth. I had somehow traveled back in time to the Northern Song Dynasty, around the 11th century. The family who had taken me in, the kindly herbalist Madame Liu, her husband who worked as a carpenter, and their teenage son who helped at the local market, believed I was a scholar's daughter from a distant province, displaced by regional conflicts. I chose to call myself Chen Ailin, a name close enough to Emily Chen that I might respond naturally to it. To explain my strange accent and occasional linguistic fumbles, I claimed to have grown up in a remote border region. The family accepted this explanation easily enough. In these troubled times, displaced persons were common. Learning to navigate this unfamiliar world was like being thrown into deep water without knowing how to swim. Every action required thought. How to eat with ancient utensils, how to dress myself in layered hanfu, how to address people of different social stations. My academic knowledge of ancient China, which I had once prided myself on, proved woefully inadequate for actually living in it. The streets of the city were a chaotic tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells, both fascinating and overwhelming. Wooden buildings lined narrow streets where merchants hawked their wares, from vegetables to ceramics to silk. Children played with simple toys while stray dogs wove between pedestrians. Scholars in flowing robes debated philosophy at tea houses, while laborers carried heavy loads on bamboo poles balanced across their shoulders. One afternoon, as I helped Madame Liu gather herbs in the marketplace, a commotion swept through the crowd. Imperial messengers on horseback cleared a path, announcing news that electrified the populace. General Zhao Mingyuan had secured a decisive victory against northern invaders and would soon return to the city in triumph. Great celebration is planned for his homecoming, Madame Liu told me, eyes bright with excitement. The young general is beloved by common folk like us. Despite being born a commoner himself, he rose through the ranks by merit alone. When will he arrive? I asked, curious despite my predicament. 3 days hence. The entire city will turn out to welcome him. You shall come with us, Aylin. It will be a spectacle unlike any other. That night, as I lay on my borrowed mat staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I clutched my jade pendant and whispered a desperate prayer to whatever forces had brought me here. Was this some cosmic mistake? A dream I couldn't wake from? Or did this mystical family heirloom truly possess the power my grandmother had hinted at? One thing was certain. If I had somehow traveled through time, there had to be a way back. And until I found it, I would need to survive in this alien, yet eerily familiar world of my ancestors. Little did I know that the upcoming celebration would be more than just a glimpse into ancient Chinese military pageantry. It would be the beginning of a love story that would transcend time itself. The day of the celebration dawned bright and clear, the autumn air crisp with anticipation. The Liu family had been preparing for days. Madame Liu had even insisted on lending me one of her better hanfu for the occasion, a modest garment of pale blue silk that had been her own festival dress in younger years. You cannot meet the returning hero looking like a peasant, she had declared, brushing aside my protests as she helped arrange my hair in a more fashionable style. I had grown to care deeply for this family who had taken in a strange woman without question, offering shelter and kindness when I was at my most vulnerable. As we made our way through the crowded streets toward the main thoroughfare, I was struck by the transformation of the city. Red lanterns hung from every eave, colorful banners bearing congratulatory messages fluttered in the breeze, and the normally orderly streets had become a sea of humanity. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders for a better view, merchants sold sweet cakes and wine from makeshift stalls, and street performers entertained the waiting crowds with acrobatics and folk songs. They say the general refused the emperor's offer of a golden palanquin, Master Liu commented as we found a spot near the city gate. He insists on entering the city on horseback alongside his men. That's why the common people love him. He has never forgotten where he came from. The distant sound of horns announced the approaching procession. A hush fell over the crowd before erupting into cheers as the first imperial standard-bearers came into view. They were followed by rows of soldiers marching in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, spears held at precise angles. The crowd threw flower petals and rice in their path, traditional symbols of blessing and gratitude. Then I saw him. General Zhao Mingyuan rode a magnificent black stallion at the center of the procession. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. He sat tall in the saddle, his armor ornate but practical, his helmet adorned with a red plume that caught the wind. Unlike the stern, impassive faces of the officials who rode behind him, the general acknowledged the cheering crowds with dignified nods, occasionally raising a hand in greeting to particularly enthusiastic well-wishers. As the procession drew nearer to where we stood, I could make out his features more clearly. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 30 at most, with a strong jawline and intelligent eyes. There was a quiet confidence in his bearing that spoke of natural authority rather than arrogance. But what struck me most was the subtle shadow of melancholy behind his formal expression, a hint of something deeper and more complex than the triumphant war hero the crowd was celebrating. He carries the weight of his victories, Madame Liu murmured beside me as if reading my thoughts. They say for every battle won, he personally writes to the families of those lost under his command. I was still contemplating this when chaos erupted. A firecracker exploded too close to the procession, startling one of the horses in the general's entourage. The panicked animal reared up, throwing its rider, before bolting directly toward the section of the crowd where we stood. People scattered in terror, but in the crush of bodies, I found myself frozen, unable to move quickly enough. Time seemed to slow. I saw the general's head turn sharply, saw his eyes lock onto the unfolding danger. In one fluid motion, he vaulted from his saddle and launched himself toward me, his body cutting through the space between us just as the runaway horse bore down. The impact of his body against mine sent us both tumbling to the ground, rolling away from the horse's deadly hooves. For a moment, we lay tangled together in the dirt, his armor digging uncomfortably into my side, his arm protectively curled around my head. The scent of leather, metal, and sandalwood filled my senses. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and urgent as he pulled back to look at me. I don't think so," I managed to reply, acutely aware of how close his face was to mine, of the unexpected gentleness in his gaze despite the tension of the moment. He helped me to my feet just as his officers rushed to his side. I noticed then that he was bleeding from a gash on his forearm where the horse's hoof must have caught him during our fall. "Your Excellence, you're injured," one of the officers exclaimed. The general glanced at his arm with disinterest. "A scratch, nothing more." "Allow me," I said, stepping forward before I could consider the impropriety of my action. Drawing on my modern first aid knowledge, I pulled a clean handkerchief from my sleeve and moved to bind his wound. His officers looked scandalized at my boldness, but the general himself merely watched with curiosity as I efficiently cleaned and wrapped the injury, using pressure points to slow the bleeding, techniques unknown in this era. "Your skill is unusual," he remarked quietly, so only I could hear. "As is your accent. Where did you learn such methods?" I felt a flutter of panic. My father was a physician," I improvised. "I traveled with him to many provinces." "And where is your father now?" "Dead," I said, finding it easier to build my lies around partial truths. "I have no family left." Something in his expression softened. "What is your name?" "Chen Island." "Well, Chen Island," he said, his voice carrying a note of decision. "My army has need of skilled healers. Many of my men return with injuries that fester beyond our physician's knowledge. Would you consider serving as a medical officer in my camp? You would be treated with respect and compensated fairly." His officers exchanged alarmed glances at this unprecedented invitation extended to a strange woman in the middle of a public street. The Liu family, who had rushed to my side after the commotion, looked equally stunned. It was a dangerous proposition. Being closer to authority figures increased the risk of my strange knowledge and behavior being discovered. And yet, the military camp might hold resources, perhaps even scholarly texts on myths and legends that could help me understand how the pendant had brought me here, and how it might take me home. "I would be honored, General," I replied with a bow that I hoped approximated the proper etiquette for addressing someone of his rank. As his officers helped him back to his horse and the procession reorganized itself, the general looked back at me once more. Something passed between us in that glance, a recognition, a connection I couldn't explain. Little did either of us know that this chance encounter would be the first thread in a tapestry of destiny that would bind us across the boundaries of time itself. The military camp sprawled across the foothills outside the city walls, an orderly arrangement of tents, training grounds, and supply depots that housed General Zhao's 5,000 men. As promised, I was given my own modest tent near the medical pavilion, along with proper attire and equipment befitting my new role. My first days were spent inventorying herbs and medicines, familiarizing myself with the traditional remedies of the era, while carefully introducing techniques from my own time that wouldn't seem too revolutionary. Methods of sterilization using rice wine, more effective ways to set broken bones, and poultices that reduced infection. I was careful to present these as obscure practices I had learned during my fictional travels, rather than modern medicine. The wounded soldiers who came under my care regarded me with initial skepticism. a woman, and a strange one at that, tending to warriors' injuries, was uncommon. But as their comrades returned to duty faster and with fewer complications, their wariness gave way to respect and even a protective camaraderie. General Zhao maintained a dignified distance at first, receiving reports on my work through his chief physician, an elderly man named Zhang, who had initially resented my presence, but gradually came to appreciate my assistance with the most difficult cases. It was nearly 2 weeks before the general himself visited the medical pavilion, arriving unannounced during my evening inventory. "Lady Chen," he said, causing me to nearly drop the ceramic jar of dried ginseng I'd been examining, "I apologize for startling you." "General Zhao," I replied, attempting an awkward bow while still holding the jar. "There's no need for apologies. This is your camp, after all." A faint smile crossed his lips. "And yet I am told that you run this pavilion as if it were your own kingdom, issuing orders that even Master Zhang now follows without question." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "I meant no disrespect." "On the contrary," he interrupted, that subtle smile deepening. "Master Zhang has served 3 generals before me and has never changed his methods for any of them. The fact that he now boils his instruments in wine before surgery at your insistence is nothing short of miraculous. I came to thank you, not to reproach you." Relief washed over me. "The men deserve the best care possible." "Indeed they do." Muskie gestured to a small bench. "May I?" When I nodded, he sat, removing his helmet to reveal thick black hair tied in the traditional topknot. Without the formal armor he typically wore, dressed instead in a simple but elegant dark blue robe, he looked younger, less burdened. "Master Zhang tells me you have reduced deaths from wound fever by more than half," he said, his voice quiet. 10 more of my men will return to their families because of your methods." "Any physician with proper training could." "No," he said firmly. "I have seen the difference. What I don't understand is why a woman with your skills was living as a commoner in the city with no recognition of your abilities." He looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of his questions. Not everyone appreciates knowledge in a woman's hands. He was silent for a moment, studying me with those perceptive eyes. "You speak differently than anyone I've ever met," he finally said. "Your ideas, your mannerisms, even the way you look at things, as if seeing them for the first time." My heart raced. Was my cover already blown? "I told you, I've traveled widely. With your physician father, yes." He nodded. "And yet you use techniques I've never seen in all my campaigns across the Empire. You speak our language fluently, but sometimes search for words as if translating from another tongue entirely." He leaned forward slightly. "Who are you really, Chen Ailan?" The directness of his question left me floundering. "I am exactly who I say I am," I managed, though my voice lacked conviction. He held my gaze for a long moment before sighing softly. "We all have secrets, Lady Chen. I will not press you for yours for now." He stood, preparing to leave. "But know this. Whatever your past, you have earned a place of respect here through your own actions. That is no small thing." After that evening, our interactions became more frequent. He would often find reasons to visit the medical pavilion, sometimes bringing rare herbs acquired from merchants, other times simply observing as I worked. Occasionally, he would invite me to join him and his officers for evening meals around the central fire, where strategy and politics were freely discussed. I discovered that General Zhao was not only a brilliant military tactician, but also a scholar who could recite poetry from memory and debate philosophy with the learned advisors sent by the emperor. Despite his humble origins, he had educated himself far beyond what was expected of a military man. Yet his common birth remained a source of tension with the aristocratic factions at court, who resented his rapid rise and the emperor's favor. "They send their sons to command battalions with no experience beyond hunting parties," he confided one evening as we walked along the camp perimeter, guards following at a discreet distance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the practice fields, where off-duty soldiers engaged in martial exercises. Then they blame me when I refuse to sacrifice those men in pointless frontal assaults to satisfy their notions of glory. "You care more for your men's lives than your reputation at court," I observed. "A reputation built on needless death is no honor at all." He paused, watching a group of young recruits practicing with wooden swords. "Each of those boys has a mother who prays for his safe return. I was once such a boy." In these unguarded moments, I glimpsed the man behind the legendary general, thoughtful, principled, and carrying burdens few could comprehend. His vulnerability touched something deep within me, something I tried desperately to ignore. Developing feelings for a man from the past could only lead to heartbreak. Eventually, I would have to find a way home. Or so I told myself, even as I found myself lingering in conversations with him, savoring his rare smiles, and feeling an inexplicable thrill whenever he sought out my company. Disaster struck one moonless night when enemy scouts launched a surprise raid on our camp. The attack was merely a probing action, not a full assault, but in the chaos of shouted orders and clashing weapons, I found myself trapped between burning tents as I tried to reach wounded soldiers calling for help. Suddenly, General Zhao was there, sword in hand, cutting down an enemy soldier who had targeted me. "Stay behind me," he commanded, engaging another attacker. But as he fought, I saw a third enemy emerging from the smoke, bow drawn and aimed at the general's unprotected back. Without thinking, I lunged forward with a surgical knife I'd been carrying, slashing at the archer's arm. My attack spoiled his aim, but the arrow still flew, grazing the general's shoulder instead of piercing his heart. In the same moment, the general turned and dispatched the archer with a single stroke of his sword. Our eyes met in the firelight, mutual recognition of what had just happened passing between us. Then he grimaced, his hand going to his wounded shoulder. "It's not deep," I said, examining the injury once we'd reached the relative safety of the command tent. "But it needs cleaning and stitching." As I worked on his wound, the tent silent, except for the distant sounds of the skirmish being brought under control, I became acutely aware of his gaze on my face, studying me with an intensity that made my hands tremble slightly. "You saved my life," he said softly. "You saved mine first," I replied, focusing on my stitches. "In the city with the horse, we're even now." "Is that what you think?" His voice had a strange quality that made me look up. The expression in his eyes caught my breath, a complex mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that made my heart leap painfully in my chest. Before either of us could speak further, his chief advisor burst into the tent with news. The raiders had been repelled, casualties were being counted, and reinforcements from the city garrison were on their way. The moment between us shattered, but something fundamental had changed. In the days that followed, as the general recovered from his injury and the camp returned to its routines, we circled each other with new awareness. Conversations that had once flowed easily now carried undercurrents of unspoken feelings. Accidental touches when I changed his bandages lingered a heartbeat too long. Glances across the evening fire held questions neither of us dared to voice. I told myself it was impossible. I was from another time, another world entirely. Eventually I would have to leave. But my heart refused to listen to reason, drawn inexorably to this complex man whose courage was matched only by his compassion, whose ambition was always tempered by honor. Then came the imperial messenger, his arrival heralded by the blast of ceremonial horns and the unfurling of the emperor's yellow banner. The news he brought would force both the general and myself to confront feelings we had carefully avoided acknowledging, and would set in motion events that would test not only our growing love, but the very fabric of time itself. The imperial messenger arrived with great pomp, escorted by a dozen guards in the emperor's colors. His palanquin was set down in the center of the camp, and from it emerged a slender man with pinched features and cold eyes that surveyed the military encampment with poorly disguised disdain. This was Lord Chen Wei, a high-ranking court official whose family had served as advisors to emperors for generations. General Zhao received him with proper ceremony in the command tent, where I was present only because I had been changing the general's bandages when the messenger arrived. I tried to make myself inconspicuous, but Lord Chen's gaze lingered on me with suspicious curiosity. "The Son of Heaven sends his congratulations on your victory, General Zhao," the Lord announced after formal greetings had been exchanged. "Such distinguished service deserves exceptional reward." The general bowed respectfully. "I serve the Empire out of duty, not for rewards." "Nevertheless," Lord Chen continued with a thin smile, "His Imperial Majesty wishes to elevate your status through a most advantageous marriage alliance. The noble house of Feng has agreed to bestow their youngest daughter, Lady Feng Meilin, upon you as principal wife. The wedding shall take place within the month, once favorable dates are determined by the imperial astrologers. A stunned silence fell over the tent. I felt the blood drain from my face as I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, afraid that looking up would reveal emotions I couldn't control. This arranged marriage was clearly a political maneuver. The Feng family were powerful aristocrats whose support could silence those who resented the general's common origins. It was also a trap, binding him to court factions that could control his future actions. The general's voice, when he finally spoke, betrayed nothing of his thoughts. This is an unexpected honor. I must request time to prepare proper thanks to His Imperial Majesty and to the noble house of Feng. Of course, Lord Chen replied smoothly. I shall remain as your guest for several days before returning with your formal acceptance. After the lord withdrew to the quarters prepared for him, an oppressive silence hung in the command tent. I finished bandaging the general's shoulder with trembling hands, aware of his eyes upon me but unable to meet his gaze. Aylin, he said softly, using my given name for the first time, look at me. Reluctantly, I raised my eyes to his, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Congratulations on your betrothal, General Zhao, I managed to say, the words like ashes in my mouth. The Lady Feng is said to be accomplished and beautiful. This is politics, not marriage, he replied, his voice tight with frustration. The Emperor seeks to bind me to court interests through this alliance. It is a great honor nonetheless, I said automatically, retreating behind formality as a shield for my breaking heart. If you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to. Before he could respond, I fled the tent, maintaining composure until I reached my own quarters, where I finally allowed silent tears to fall. I had been foolish to let myself feel anything for him, knowing I belonged to another time. Now reality had reasserted itself in the cruelest way possible. That evening, I avoided the central fire where the general dined with Lord Chen, staying instead in the medical pavilion to organize supplies that didn't need organizing. As I was about to return to my tent under cover of darkness, a shadow blocked the doorway. Is this how it will be now? General Zhao asked, his voice low. You hiding from me until you vanish entirely? I'm not hiding, I lied. I have duties, as do I. He stepped into the pavilion, closing the distance between us, but duty and desire are not always aligned. My breath caught. General. Mingyuan, he interrupted. My name is Mingyuan. It doesn't matter what I call you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You are to be married. We should not be alone together like this. And yet, here we are. He was close enough now that I could see the conflict in his eyes, even in the dim light of the single oil lamp. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will never speak of this again. I opened my mouth to say exactly that, the sensible, proper thing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I whispered, What I feel doesn't matter. We both know this is impossible. Why? He demanded. Because of an arranged marriage to a woman I've never met? Or because of whatever secret you're hiding, the reason you speak and think differently, the knowledge no ordinary physician's daughter could possess? Fear shot through me. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, he insisted. From the moment we met, I sensed something extraordinary about you. At first I thought you might be a spy, but a spy wouldn't save my life or heal my men with such dedication. His hand reached up, not quite touching my cheek. Who are you really, Aylin? Where do you come from? The weight of my deception suddenly felt unbearable. For weeks I had navigated this world alone, carrying the impossible truth that I could share with no one. But looking into his eyes, I found myself longing to unburden my soul, consequences be damned. Before I could respond, however, the sound of approaching footsteps made us both stiffen. Lord Chen appeared in the doorway, his thin face illuminated by the lantern he carried. General Zhao, he said, deceptively pleasant. I was concerned when you left our discussions so abruptly. His gaze shifted to me, hardening. I see now what drew you away. Lady Chen was checking my wound, the general replied smoothly. Fud. The arrow that struck me during the raid was treated with an unusual poison. She has unique knowledge of such matters. Lord Chen's eyes narrowed. Indeed. How fortunate that she possesses such unique knowledge. He stepped closer, studying me with undisguised suspicion. I find it curious that no one at court has heard of this remarkably skilled physician's daughter. What province did you say your family hailed from, Lady Chen? I didn't say, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. My father valued privacy in his work. How convenient. Lord Chen's smile didn't reach his eyes. General, if I might have a private word? After they departed, I returned to my tent with a growing sense of dread. Lord Chen clearly suspected something amiss about my identity. If he investigated further, how long before my deception unraveled? My fears proved well-founded. The following morning, as I made my rounds in the medical pavilion, Imperial guards entered and began searching through my personal effects. When I protested, they produced an order bearing Lord Chen's seal, authorizing a search for evidence of espionage. To my horror, they discovered the few modern items I had kept hidden: my ballpoint pen, a small notebook with English writing, and the jade pendant itself, which they seized despite my desperate pleas. By midday, I stood in the command tent facing formal accusations, the items displayed on a table as evidence. General Zhao sat stiffly behind his desk, his face an unreadable mask as Lord Chen presented his case. These objects are clearly of foreign design, Lord Chen declared triumphantly. No Chinese artisan could craft such things. The strange markings in this book are unlike any known script, clearly a cipher for transmitting military secrets. He held up my pen. And this metal tube contains a substance that writes without ink or brush, clearly a tool for a spy who must communicate quickly and secretly. General Zhao examined each item carefully, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was formal and distant. These are indeed unusual objects. How do you explain their presence among your belongings, Lady Chen? I could see the doubt in his eyes, mingled with something that might have been hurt. He wanted to believe in me, but the evidence before him was damning by the standards of this time. They are family heirlooms, I stammered, knowing how weak the explanation sounded, passed down through generations. Impossible. Lord Chen scoffed. No such craftsmanship exists within our borders or beyond them. She is clearly a spy, perhaps from the western regions, sent to infiltrate your camp and assassinate you once she gained your trust. That's absurd, I protested. If I wanted to harm the general, I've had countless opportunities when treating his wound. Perhaps your masters commanded you to wait until you had extracted sufficient military intelligence. Lord Chen countered smoothly. Or perhaps you simply lost your nerve when faced with his personal attention. The insinuation in his tone made my cheeks burn with humiliation. General Zhao rose from his seat, his face hardened into the impassive mask of command. Lady Chen will be confined to the secure tent under guard while we investigate these allegations further. She is to be treated with respect befitting her position as a healer, but no one is to speak with her without my explicit permission. As the guards led me away, I cast one desperate glance back at him. For a brief moment, his stern expression faltered, revealing a turmoil that matched my own. Then the tent flap closed behind me, and I was marched across the camp to a small, heavily guarded tent normally reserved for high-ranking prisoners of war. The hours crawled by in solitary confinement. Through the canvas walls, I could hear the camp continuing its normal activities, the changing of guards, the call to evening meal, the distant sounds of training exercises. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill, I huddled under the single blanket I had been provided, clutching the jade pendant that had been returned to me after Lord Chen had examined it and found nothing overtly suspicious about it. In the darkness, I thought I saw a faint green glow emanating from the jade. As I stared at it, the glow intensified slightly, and I could have sworn I heard my grandmother's voice whispering from very far away. The pendant responds to the phases of the moon, Emily. Only at the full moon can it gather enough power to bridge worlds. Remember this if you ever find yourself lost in time. I pressed the pendant between my palms, closing my eyes to concentrate on the voice. When, I whispered, when is the next full moon? As if in answer, the pendant grew warmer, and in my mind's eye I saw the waxing moon, nearly 3/4 full. 3 days. I had 3 days until the full moon might offer me a chance to return home. The realization brought not relief, but a wrenching conflict. Return home to my own time, my own world, and leave behind the man I had come to love? For I could no longer deny, even to myself, that I had fallen deeply in love with General Zhao Mingyuan, a man born nearly 1,000 years before my time. My anguished thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of the tent flap opening. I looked up, expecting a guard with the evening meal, and instead saw General Zhao himself, alone and unarmored, slipping silently into my prison. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered, rising to my feet. "No," he agreed, his voice equally quiet. "I shouldn't." He studied my face in the dim light filtering through the tent canvas. "I've spent hours examining those strange objects, questioning everything I thought I knew about you." My heart sank. "And what conclusion have you reached, General?" "None that makes sense." He took a step closer. "You're not a spy, of that much I'm certain. No spy would have saved my life at risk to their own or shown such genuine care for my men. Then what am I in your estimation?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. "You are a mystery I cannot solve through rational means, so I am left with only one option, to ask you directly for the truth, no matter how implausible it might seem." He swallowed hard. "You might not believe the truth. Try me." His voice softened. "Aylin, if that is even your name, I am here not as your accuser or your general, but as a man who—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words that a warrior of his era would rarely speak aloud. "As a man who has come to care for you more deeply than honor or duty should allow." In that moment, looking into his eyes, I made my decision. The burden of my secret had become too heavy to bear alone, and if anyone in this time could understand, or at least believe, it would be him. "My real name is Emily Chen," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was born in San Francisco, California, in the United States of America in the year 1. I told him about modern medicine, about technologies that would sound like sorcery to people of his era, about how history remembered the Song Dynasty as a golden age of culture and innovation. When I finally fell silent, emotionally exhausted from unburdening myself, he remained quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I should think you mad," he finally said, "or more cleverly deceptive than any spy I've encountered." My heart sank. "I understand if you can't believe me." "And yet," he continued softly, "it would explain everything that has puzzled me about you. Your strange knowledge, your different way of thinking, the curious objects." He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against my cheek, with a tenderness that made my breath catch. "The way you look at our world, as if seeing it for the first time, with eyes that have witnessed wonders I cannot imagine." "You believe me?" I whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I believe that you believe it," he replied carefully, "and that is enough for now. Whether your tale is truth or delusion, I know in my heart you mean no harm to me or my men." His expression hardened. "But Lord Chen will not be so open-minded. He means to see you executed as a spy, Aylin, Emily." "The full moon," I said urgently. "My grandmother's voice, I heard it through the pendant. She said the pendant's power is tied to the full moon. In 3 nights, I might have a chance to return to my time." He absorbed this information with a slight nod. "Then we have 3 days to ensure your safety until then." His hands closed around mine. "I will help you escape tonight. There is an abandoned temple in the hills, 2 hours' ride from here. You can hide there until the full moon. Your position, your reputation, are nothing compared to your life," he interrupted fiercely. "I have already written to the Emperor, refusing the marriage alliance and requesting a transfer to the western frontier. My career at court is finished regardless." I stared at him in shock. "You refused the Emperor? Why would you do something so reckless?" In the shadowy confines of the tent, his held mine with an intensity that needed no words. But he spoke them anyway, his voice low and certain, "Because my heart is no longer mine to give to Lady Feng or anyone else. It belongs to a mysterious physician who fell into my life like a star from heaven." Before I could respond, he pressed something into my hand, a small packet containing food, a change of clothes, and a map. "The guards will change at the midnight hour. The one who takes the eastern position is loyal to me personally. He will look away, head for the small stream behind the camp, then follow it upstream into the hills. I will meet you at the temple tomorrow night." With that, he was gone, slipping out of the tent as silently as he had entered. I clutched the packet to my chest, my mind reeling from his confession and the dangerous plan now set in motion. True to his word, I escaped that night. Making my way through the darkness, to the abandoned temple he had described. It was a small, dilapidated structure, long forsaken by monks, but still providing adequate shelter. As I waited through the following day, watching the sun track across the sky, I contemplated the impossible choice before me: return to my own time and everything familiar, or remain in this ancient world with the man I had grown to love. Next evening, as promised, Mingyuan arrived alone on horseback. The relief on his face when he saw me was palpable. He dismounted quickly and crossed the temple courtyard in long strides to embrace me, propriety forgotten in the urgency of our situation. "Lord Chen has discovered your escape," he said grimly. "He claims it proves your guilt and has sent riders in all directions. It won't be long before they search these hills." "What will happen to you?" I asked, fear tightening my chest. I told him I ordered your release after further questioning convinced me of your innocence. He doesn't believe me, of course. Mingyuan's smile was grim. "My letter to the Emperor has already been dispatched. Once it arrives, Lord Chen will have no authority over me, though I expect my illustrious military career will come to an abrupt end." "I never meant to destroy everything you've worked for," I said, guilt washing over me. He took my face between his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses of a lifetime of swordsmanship. "You've destroyed nothing. You've shown me that there is more to life than duty and honor. There is also this," he hesitated, searching for words, "this feeling that makes everything else pale in comparison." "Love," I supplied softly. "Love," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I love you, Emily, from the future. Against all reason, against duty and tradition, I love you." As the moon rose higher in the night sky, we talked of impossible things, of my world with its technological marvels, of his life before becoming a general, of the strange twist of fate that had brought us together across a millennium. We spoke of what might have been in a world where time did not stand between us. When dawn broke, Mingyuan reluctantly prepared to return to camp. "I must make an appearance to prevent a full-scale search of the area," he explained. "I'll return tomorrow night, the night of the full moon." After he left, I spent the day in anxious contemplation, my fingers constantly touching the jade pendant that hung around my neck. It seemed warmer than usual, occasionally emitting a faint green glow that grew stronger as the day progressed toward evening. By the time night fell again, I had made my decision. When the full moon rose over the temple, I would attempt to return to my own time. As much as it broke my heart, I couldn't ask Mingyuan to abandon everything for me, his duty, his men, his world, and I couldn't be certain that staying was even an option. Perhaps the pendant would take me back, regardless of my wishes. I was standing in the temple courtyard watching the moon rise when I heard hoofbeats approaching. Mingyuan appeared, riding hard, his face tense with urgency. "Lord Chen is coming," he said as he dismounted. "One of my scouts spotted his party less than an hour behind me. We need to move further into the mountains." "There's no time," I said, showing him the pendant, now glowing steadily in the moonlight. "It's happening already. I can feel it." His face fell as understanding dawned. "Then this is goodbye." "I think it has to be," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "I don't belong here, Mingyuan, and you have responsibilities, men who depend on you." "None of that matters without you," he insisted, taking my hands in his. The pendant glowed brighter between us, its light casting strange shadows across his beloved face. "Let me come with you." I stared at him in shock. "To my time? That's impossible." "Is it?" he challenged. "You traveled here. Why couldn't I travel there? Your grandmother said the pendant has the power to bridge worlds for true love." His eyes held mine, fierce with determination. "I've written my final report to the Emperor, recommending my second-in-command for promotion. My duties are discharged honorably. There is nothing left for me here except an unwanted marriage and court politics I despise." Before I could respond, sounds of approaching riders reached us. Lord Chen and his men had arrived sooner than expected. "Emily," Mingyuan said urgently as the pendant's glow intensified to an almost blinding radiance. "I've faced death on battlefields across the Empire without fear, but the thought of living without you terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. Take me with you." In that moment of crisis, with the pendant burning between us and hostile forces approaching, I made my choice. I pulled Mingyuan close, wrapping my arms around him as the jade's glow enveloped us both. "Hold on to me," I whispered. Don't let go, no matter what. The world around us began to dissolve, the ancient temple fading as if made of mist. I heard shouts, Lord Chen's men entering the courtyard, but they seemed to come from an enormous distance. The green light swelled, consuming everything, and I felt a sensation of falling through endless space. Mingyuan's arms tight around me, anchoring me as reality itself seemed to tear apart. I awoke to the sound of car horns and the familiar hum of my apartment's air conditioning. For a moment I lay still, eyes closed, convinced that everything had been an elaborate dream, the song Dynasty, the military camp, Mingyuan. But then I felt a weight across my body and heard steady breathing that was not my own. My eyes flew open. I was indeed back in my bedroom in San Francisco, surrounded by my IKEA furniture and framed travel posters. Dawn light filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. And beside me, still dressed in the clothing of an ancient Chinese general, lay Mingyuan, unconscious but breathing steadily. "Oh my God," I whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. "It worked. You're really here." His eyelids fluttered at my touch, then opened. Confusion, alarm, and disorientation washed across his face in rapid succession as he took in the utterly alien surroundings. He sat up abruptly, his hand instinctively reaching for a sword that wasn't there. "Emily?" His voice was unsteady. "What sorcery is this? Where are we?" "We're in my home," I said gently, taking his hand. "In my time, in San Francisco, America, the pendant brought us both back." He stared around the room, his eyes wide as he tried to comprehend objects completely outside his frame of reference. The digital alarm clock, the light switch on the wall, the laptop computer on my desk. "So this is the future," he murmured, a mixture of awe and apprehension in his voice. "Your world." "Yes," I confirmed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had happened. This man from the 11th century had left behind everything he knew, his position, his era, his entire reality, to be with me. The responsibility of helping him adapt to the 21st century felt staggering. Slowly, carefully, I began to explain the basics of modern life, starting with simple things like electric lights and running water. Mingyuan absorbed each new concept with remarkable composure, asking intelligent questions and quickly grasping fundamental principles. His military training had clearly taught him to adapt to new situations quickly, and his natural intellect helped him make connections between the unfamiliar technologies around him. "These are like paper lanterns," he said when I demonstrated the light switch, but without fire. "And when I showed him how the shower worked, it's like a mountain spring that comes whenever you command it." His wonder at these everyday conveniences touched me deeply, reminding me how miraculous they would seem to someone from his time. When I opened the window to show him the city skyline, skyscrapers gleaming in the morning sun, the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance, cars flowing along the streets below, he fell silent, overwhelmed by the scale and complexity of modern San Francisco. "How many people live in this city?" he asked after a long moment. "About 800,000, I replied, plus millions more in the surrounding areas." He nodded slowly, processing this information. "More than the capital in my time, and these buildings that touch the sky, how do they stand without collapsing?" I explained the basics of modern construction: steel frameworks, reinforced concrete, architectural engineering, realizing as I did so how much knowledge I took for granted. Everything around us, from the synthetic fabrics of my bedding to the plastics in my kitchen, would require explanation. As the day progressed, I introduced him to more aspects of modern life. Packaged food from the refrigerator, which he approached with understandable suspicion, television, which he initially thought contained tiny performers, and the concept of cars, metal carriages that run without horses. Each new discovery seemed to both fascinate and slightly overwhelm him, but he faced everything with remarkable courage. "Your world moves so quickly," he observed that evening as we sat on my small balcony, watching the city lights come on. "Everyone rushes from place to place, always in a hurry." "Yes," I agreed, seeing my familiar world through his eyes. "We're obsessed with saving time, yet never seem to have enough of it." He was quiet for a moment. "And yet, for all these wonders, your people don't seem happier than mine. Their faces as they hurry past, they carry worries just as heavy as any peasant or merchant in my era." His insight surprised me. "That's actually very true." Technology has solved many problems, but created new ones too. As night fell, reality began to set in. What would happen next? Mingyuan had no identity in this world, no birth certificate, no social security number, no education credentials or work history that would make sense in the 21st century. Couldn't read or write English. Everything from paying for groceries to crossing the street safely would require instruction. "Are you having regrets?" I asked softly as we prepared for bed, lending him some oversized sleepwear I had bought during a phase of wearing men's pajamas. "About coming here?" He considered the question seriously before answering. "I have concerns, fears. I've gone from being a general who understood his world completely to a man who understands almost nothing." He smiled slightly. "But regrets? No, not when I look at you." His simple honesty moved me deeply. I reached out to touch his face, still hardly believing he was really here. "We'll figure this out," I promised, one day at a time. Following weeks tested that promise severely. While Mingyuan quickly grasped abstract concepts and adapted admirably to modern conveniences, the practical aspects of integration proved challenging. We constructed a backstory. He was a distant relative from a remote part of China who had come to America for a fresh start after losing his family. My grandmother, the only person I dared tell the truth to, used her connections in the Chinese-American community to help secure rudimentary identity documents. "I always knew that Pendant was special," she said when I finally brought Mingyuan to meet her, studying him with shrewd eyes. "But bringing back a husband from the past, even I didn't expect that." "He's not my husband," I corrected quickly, blushing. "Not yet," she replied with a knowing smile. "But time will tell." With her help, Mingyuan began English lessons and cultural orientation classes meant for new immigrants. His intelligence and discipline served him well. Within months, he could manage basic conversations in English and navigate simple outings on his own. He developed a particular fascination with historical documentaries, especially those about China, often commenting on inaccuracies or providing insights that historians would have treasured. "They got it wrong," he would say, pointing at the screen. "That style of armor wasn't used until decades after the period they're depicting." Gradually, we developed a plan. My background in East Asian studies and his first-hand knowledge of Song Dynasty culture made us uniquely qualified to establish a foundation focused on preserving and accurately representing Chinese historical heritage. My connections in academia helped secure initial funding, while Mingyuan's detailed knowledge of ancient military strategies, court protocols, and daily life practices provided content that scholars found invaluable, even if they assumed his expertise came from intensive research rather than personal experience. As our professional partnership flourished, so did our personal relationship. Mingyuan approached love with the same thoughtful intensity he brought to everything else, learning modern expectations and boundaries while maintaining the core of who he was: honorable, protective, and profoundly loyal. There were cultural disconnects, of course. He struggled with the concept of gender equality, though he made sincere efforts to adapt his thinking. I, in turn, had to accept that some of his values were deeply ingrained and would change only gradually, if at all. 6 months after his arrival, on a clear spring morning, he asked me to accompany him to the Chinese Garden in Golden Gate Park. It was one of his favorite places in the city, a space that contained elements familiar to him amid the overwhelming modernity of San Francisco. As we walked along the winding paths, he seemed unusually quiet, stopping finally beside the central pond where koi fish swam lazily beneath lily pads. "I've been thinking about time," he said, watching the ripples on the water's surface. "In my era, I believed time moved in one direction, like a river flowing to the sea. But my presence here proves that isn't true." He turned to face me. "Time is more like this pond, with currents and connections we cannot see from the surface." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," I said, wondering where this philosophical turn was leading. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A ring fashioned from metal I immediately recognized as part of his old general's seal, the imperial symbol carefully preserved in the design. "In my time," he said softly, "I held rank and commanded thousands. Here, I am still learning how to order coffee correctly." A self-deprecating smile crossed his lips. "But across time and space, one thing remains constant: my love for you, Emily Chen." My heart seemed to stop as he knelt down in the traditional Western pose he must have seen in movies or television. "I may be a man out of time," he continued, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "But with you, I am exactly where I belong. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, I marveled at the incredible journey that had brought us together. A magical pendant, a time leap spanning a millennium, and love that had proven strong enough to bridge even that impossible gap. Later that evening, as we celebrated with a small dinner at my grandmother's house, she raised her glass in a toast. "To Emily and Mingyuan," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Proof that true love isn't bound by time or space or reason. May your life together be as extraordinary as how you found each other." As I looked at Mingyuan, this remarkable man who had given up everything familiar to follow his heart into an unknown future, I felt a profound sense of wonder and gratitude. Our story defied logic and science and probability, and yet here we were, two people from different millennia, building a life together, one day at a time. The jade pendant, now displayed in a special case in our home, occasionally caught the light in ways that seemed almost animate, as if acknowledging its role in our impossible love story. Sometimes I wondered if there were other couples like us throughout history, time-crossed lovers brought together by forces beyond understanding. But mostly I focused on the present we were creating together. Mingyuan still struggled sometimes with aspects of modern life, and I occasionally felt the weight of responsibility for bringing him to this overwhelming new world. But when doubts crept in, I remembered the look in his eyes in that ancient temple as Lord Chen's men approached, the absolute certainty that wherever and whenever we were together was where he belonged. And I knew with equal certainty that he was right. Epilogue. 5 years later, our foundation had grown into a respected institution specializing in Song Dynasty culture. Scholars and students came from around the world to learn from our uniquely authentic programs on ancient Chinese military strategy, governance, and daily life. Few suspected that the soft-spoken man who could demonstrate exactly how to don 11th century armor or wield a period-appropriate sword with breathtaking skill had actually lived that reality. On a warm summer evening, as we walked hand in hand along the beach near our new home, Mingyuan paused to watch the sunset reflecting on the water. "In 1,000 years," he mused, "this same sun set over the imperial capital as I led my troops back from battle. And now it sets here, as I walk with my wife in a world I could never have imagined." He squeezed my hand gently. Time is indeed a mystery beyond comprehension. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had remained unchanged despite everything else that had transformed in his life. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. "Leaving your world behind?" He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness before answering. "I miss certain things, the simplicity of knowing my place and purpose, the comrades who fought beside me, even the mountains and rivers that formed the landscape of my youth." His arm slipped around my waist. "But I have gained so much more than I lost, knowledge that would have seemed like sorcery, the freedom to live beyond the constraints of rank and tradition." He turned to face me fully, and most importantly, a love that defied time itself. As we walked back toward our home where a small gathering of friends waited to celebrate our anniversary, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. The general from ancient China had adapted to modern life with remarkable resilience, integrating the values and wisdom of his era with the knowledge and opportunities of mine. And I had gained a perspective on both worlds that few could ever hope to understand. Together we had created something unique, a bridge between past and present, a love story that spanned a millennium, and a life that neither of us could have imagined before a magical jade pendant brought our worlds together. Perhaps, I thought as we reached our door, this had been the pendant's purpose all along, not merely to transport through time, but to remind us that some connections transcend even its formidable boundaries. That love, in its purest form, belongs to no single era, but to the timeless human experience that unites us all, whether we live in the bustling court of the Song Dynasty or the technological wonders of modern San Francisco. And if time is indeed like my husband's metaphorical pond rather than a linear river, perhaps somewhere our story continues to ripple outward, touching other lives across the centuries with its simple but profound message that true love knows no boundaries, not even those of time itself. The end.